So now for our second scone recipe. I cannot get enough of making scones. I think they're really, really fun. And the second one I want to show you is called the mini chocolate chip scone. It's really quite basic. It's for those of you that may have watched the lemon scone recipe that I posted. It's not nearly as detailed. The one thing about this recipe though is that it makes more scones. So I'm choosing to do the complete recipe, but I'm going to freeze half of my scones before I even bake them and just bake up the half batch, which will be 16 mini scones. 16 for the freezer and 16 for my oven. So for today, the mini chocolate chip scones, you're going to need some flour, some sugar, some heavy cream, which I use whipping cream, vanilla, baking powder, salt, mini chocolate chips, and a cup of frozen butter, which is down here. And I've got 2 bowls, a sharp knife, a spoon, a butter knife, fork, 1 cup, half a cup, and a half a teaspoon. And then I have my grater. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we are going to measure, sometimes I forget to preheat my oven. For this scone recipe, you're going to preheat your oven for 375 degrees. 375, start. And right behind me, I have 2 of my baking stones prepared with parchment paper. Okay, so I'm going to measure my flour. And I know I've said this a lot on the videos, but I overfill my cup, taking my flat edge, getting rid of those potential air pockets. And so we need 4 cups of flour. So this makes a big batch of scones. I like to do this if I have a lot of guests coming over, or if I want to take this to, if I want to make a treat for a meeting for some of the teachers. This is a perfect recipe because it makes 32 mini scones. And there's 4. So that's 4 cups of flour. Then I'm going to take a half a cup of sugar. So like I said in my lemon scone video, I like scones because they're relatively low on sugar, unlike a cookie or a cake. So for this whole recipe, for 32 scones, there's only a half a cup of sugar in it. So I'm going to put that in with my flour. Then I'm going to add 4 teaspoons of baking powder. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. So there's my half teaspoon, there's my salt. I'm going to get a little lazy like I did with my lemon scones, and I'm going to, that's about a half a teaspoon of salt. Pop that right in. So then I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to totally mix all of those dry ingredients, incorporating it well. I want my baking powder distributed all through my flour. I don't want any condensed areas with baking powder or with any of the ingredients for that matter. Okay, I've got that well mixed. Now, in the lemon scone video, we talked about the butter and the need to freeze your butter. You want your butter ice cold because when the scone is baking in the oven, that's going to release moisture and make your scones really tender on the inside. This recipe calls for 1 cup. So I've already measured out my cup this morning and I popped it into the freezer, and then I've just broken it into 2 pieces. So you're going to need to grate this butter over your flour. So I'm going to do a little bit of cheating. Whenever I make scones, I always do it with just my hands and my bowls. I never use my mixer. But with this recipe, because I have to grate 1 cup of butter, I get a little lazy, and plus it takes a little bit of time. And so I want to show you one of my favorite machines in my kitchen that saves me a whole lot of time, and just it's really fun to use. So I'll be right back. So this is one of my favorite tools, and sometimes I kind of think it's one of my favorite kitchen, it's almost like a toy for my kitchen. And this is my food processor. I received a couple of Christmases ago, and it really is a game changer for any kind of chopping or any big job that you have in the kitchen. And honestly, I think that this probably could grate nails. It is so powerful, and I thought it might be kind of fun to demonstrate. So I'm gonna take my frozen butter, and in a matter of literally seconds, this is going to grate. It's gonna be a little bit noisy, but fun. That's a 1/2 cup. And there, that's a full cup of butter grated. That saved me a whole lot of time. So I'm going to empty this butter into my flour mixture, and I'll be right back. So now that I have my grated butter in my flour, I'm going to mix that in. And just as I said with the lemon scones, I don't want to overmix any of my ingredients. I just want to simply make sure that all the butter is mixed in with the flour and that it's coated, and it almost looks like little bumps and lumps. I don't know if you can tell. So I'm going to now add my chocolate chips. This recipe calls for 1 cup of mini chocolate chips. A lot of times whenever any recipe calls for a chocolate chip, I'm a milk chocolate kind of girl, but I've never been able to find mini milk chocolate chips. So and you really like mini chocolate chips with this recipe because the scones are mini scones. So I use my semi-sweet chocolate chips, and it's good and it's better for you. Less sugar in the chocolate. So if a little bit extra spills over, that's not a big deal. Chocolate, yummy. And so I'm just going to fold the chocolate chips into the mixture. This is such a less time-consuming recipe than the lemon one. Okay, so I have my chocolate chips and my flour, and now I need my liquid. And so this recipe calls for 1 cup of heavy cream. So I use whipping cream. Some of you might ask, can you substitute just milk, regular milk? I've never done it with regular milk. I think that the recipe, I try to stay close to recipes as much as possible. If you had cereal cream, I think that would be okay, but the thick cream really makes the scone rich and thick, and I'm maybe concerned that milk might dilute the batter and make it more cake-like perhaps. But if you try it, let me know. So I'm going to make sure that I've got all the cream from my measuring cup. There. And close that back up so I don't spill it. And then the recipe calls for, I made a mistake and put my vanilla away. Grab my vanilla. Then the recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. See if I can measure this without spilling it. There. So I'm going to mix that in with the cream. before I add the liquid to my dry. And just like that. And that's it. No eggs. So this is a perfect, nice treat for someone that has an egg allergy, like Madame Fox's little girl. Okay, I am going to add my wet to my dry. And once again, you really want to get all that liquid. You're going to need every last little drop. This is essentially double the dough that we just made with lemon scones, because it's 4 cups of flour. So as I previously said, we never want to overwork our scone dough. So I'm going to fold back and forth and trying to get as much of the dry mixed in with the wet so that the dough nicely starts to come together. But I'm not going to pop it in my mixer. I'm not going to beat vigorously. And in just a moment, I'm going to do what I did with lemon scones, and I'm going to turn this out onto my clean work surface, a countertop. So that's about all it's going to come together. I gotta get my hands in there next. So I'm gonna clean up my countertop and I'll be right back. Now it's time to work this dough into a nice solid ball. So really carefully, because there's a lot of mixture here. I don't want it to spill all over my counter nor my floor. I'm going to pour all of it onto my countertop. So I cut it all out, scrape my fork as much as I can. And I'm going to set that over there. So with clean hands, I am now going to try to take all of this and into a nice big ball. So it's kind of like playing in the sand almost. And you're going to find that this is a little bit drier than if you try the lemon. Because remember, the lemon recipe had more moisture in it with the egg, and this doesn't have any eggs. So when you eat it, it's going to almost have like a shortbread type of texture, and more like a cookie than not. So I haven't even kept track of how many times I've squeezed this. I'm just trying to make it come together, and I might actually separate it. And so what I'm doing with my hands is I'm trying to blend in the butter with the flour, so the dry ingredients. And it might scare you, but you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to get this worked in because it's too dry. But you just kind of have to stay with it and go with it. So I'm going to continue working at this, and in just a moment I'll be back to show you what it looks like. All right, so you'll notice that I have 4 round discs in front of me. And if you make this recipe and you've made the lemon scone recipe, you're going to notice a difference. As I said, this does not have eggs in it. So this dough is really quite hard and not as soft and malleable with your hands as the lemon dough. And so when I'm making the disc, this is kind of what I do. I press it down and then I kind of shape it in the circle. And so it takes a little bit of time. This is probably the only somewhat difficult part to this recipe is this right here, getting the dough. You're going to be working with it and you're going to think, oh, Ms. Bell, this is impossible. I need more liquid. But if you work with it and if you have some patience, trust me, it's okay. So now I'm going to take my pizza cutter, just like I did with the lemon scones, and each disc is going to be 8 little mini scones. And then I'm going to freeze 16 of them, and then I'm going to bake the other 16. And so I'm going to go right down the middle and down the other middle. And notice that I'm really holding and I'm going slowly because I'm kind of cutting through some chocolate chips. And boom. There I have 8 little scones. So I'm going to do that with the rest. I'm going to get 16 of them on my baking sheets, and I will be back and pop them in the oven. All right, so I have my scones ready to go in the oven. Half of them are on my 2 baking sheets, and the other half are right here wrapped up in saran wrap, and they are going to go into the freezer to bake at another time. Remember, I wouldn't keep scone dough in the freezer any more than 3 weeks. And I'm going to bake these scones in an oven that is preheated to 375. Keep an eye on them, but roughly about 13 to 14 minutes, depending on how hot your oven gets. You want them to just slightly start to get brown along the edges, and they'll raise up. So yeah, I will be back after they are baked. Okay, we have got our scones baked. They've been cooling on the rack, so I just want to show you they are just slightly golden on the bottom. So remember, these are going to be a different texture than the lemon scones if you are making those, because they do not have eggs. These are going to be more like a cookie type of texture, and a shortbread type of cookie. So now we're going to do a glaze. And you might say, oh, Ms. Bell, another glaze? Of course, another glaze. Glaze is delicious. Now, if you're baking up all 32 scones, the measurements for the glaze are about a cup of icing sugar, a couple of tablespoons of milk, and a half a teaspoon of vanilla. I'm only doing 16, so you know I don't like to measure icing sugar. So I'm going to simply pour a little bit into this bowl. And those of you that are dependent on measurements, you're not going to like me very much because I don't know how much that is. It's just a little bit. And then I'm going to take, some of you are going to go, what? So my mother, when she used to measure vanilla, very rarely would she actually use a measuring spoon. She would just pour it into the cap. How many of you have memories of that? So when I just want a little bit of vanilla, because the full recipe calls for half of a teaspoon of vanilla, I'm just going to pour a little tiny wee bit into the cap, pour it into the icing sugar, and then I'm going to pour a little bit into pour a little bit of milk into my icing sugar, and I'm going to start to stir up. So remember, we want this to be a glaze, so we want it fairly runny. And if you pour too much milk in, then you're going to have to add some more icing sugar. So you don't want to fall down that slippery slope. So it's better to start out with just a little bit. I'm going to pour a little bit more in, and I'm starting to get the consistency that I want. And a little bit more. So this is just icing sugar, milk, and a little bit of vanilla for flavor. And again, it's just a drizzle over these delicious mini chocolate chip scones. So that is the right consistency. So I'm going to put the cap back on my milk. I'm going to move this stuff out of the way so you can see. You see? so you can see me drizzle. There, how's that? Okay, so I'm now going to drizzle the icing sugar on the scones. So I'm not going to put as much icing sugar, or glaze, I should say, on these scones as I did, that one got a little bit more, as I did the lemon scones. These are going to be just a hint of sweetness on top of an already very sweet, yummy mini chocolate chip scone. And I find not only does the glaze taste good, but it just looks really, really pretty. And once again, notice I have wax paper underneath my rack to catch the icing, the glaze that's falling down, which makes for easier cleanup. And voila, there. That is the mini chocolate chip scone for you chocolate lovers. And remember, it is eggless if you are allergic to eggs, as I know some of you are. So that's it for my videos for today. Leave a little comment or show me a picture if you try the recipe. Let me know how you make out. And as I said in the other video, keep doing what we're doing, guys. Remember, we're all in this together. See you later.